She stumbled upon an old diary while cleaning her grandmother's attic, but she never imagined the explosive secrets it contained. Now, what she does with that information could bring down the entire town. Rachel's fingers traced the dusty edges of the cardboard box, her nose wrinkling at the musty scent that permeated her grandmother's attic. Sunlight streamed through the small, circular window, illuminating dancing dust motes in its wake. She brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "I can't believe how much stuff Grandma kept up here," she muttered to herself, her voice echoing in the cramped space. At 28, Rachel had always considered herself a practical woman. Her job as a local journalist in the small town of Millbrook had honed her investigative skills, but nothing could have prepared her for the task of sorting through decades of her grandmother's memories. She reached into the box, pulling out old photo albums, knickknacks, and yellowed newspapers. As she set aside a stack of vintage magazines, her hand brushed against something leather-bound and smooth. Curious, she pulled it out, revealing a worn burgundy diary. "What's this?" Rachel wondered aloud, running her fingers over the cover. The leather was soft and supple, despite its age. A small, tarnished lock hung uselessly from its side, the key long lost to time. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a twinge of guilt at the thought of invading her grandmother's privacy. But curiosity got the better of her, and she gently pried open the cover. The first page was blank except for a date, June 15th, 1962. Rachel's eyebrows shot up. This diary was over 60 years old. As she flipped through the pages, her grandmother's elegant handwriting filled her vision. The entries started innocuously enough. Details about daily life in Millbrook, gossip about neighbors, and musings on the changing times. But as Rachel read on, her eyes widened. The tone of the entries began to shift, becoming more secretive, more urgent. Names she recognized, pillars of the community, families whose legacies still shaped Millbrook, appeared with increasing frequency, often accompanied by cryptic notes and veiled accusations. "Oh, Grandma," Rachel whispered, her heart racing. "What did you know?" A car horn blared outside, startling her. She glanced at her watch and realized she'd been in the attic for hours. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the room. Rachel stood, stretching her stiff muscles. She looked down at the diary in her hands, feeling the weight of its secrets. Should she keep reading? Or was it better to let sleeping dogs lie? As she descended the attic stairs, the diary clutched to her chest. Rachel's mind whirled with possibilities. Her journalistic instincts were on high alert, sensing a story that could shake Millbrook to its core. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of water, trying to calm her racing thoughts. The house felt different now, as if the very walls were whispering long-buried secrets. Rachel's phone buzzed, startling her. It was a text from her best friend, Lily. "Hey, Rach! Don't forget about dinner tonight. 7 p.m. at the Rusty Nail. The whole gang's coming." Rachel groaned. She'd completely forgotten about their monthly get-together. Part of her wanted to cancel, to spend the evening delving deeper into the diary's mysteries. But she knew her friends would worry if she didn't show up. As she got ready to leave, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. The diary sat on her bedside table, a silent promise of revelations to come. The drive to the Rusty Nail was short, but it gave Rachel time to collect her thoughts. The familiar sights of Millbrook, the quaint storefronts, the manicured lawns, the steeple of the old church rising above the trees, all seemed different now, as if hiding dark secrets behind their picturesque facades. As she parked her car and walked into the restaurant, Rachel plastered on a smile, determined to act normal. But her mind was elsewhere, still up in that dusty attic, still lost in the pages of her grandmother's diary. Little did she know, the secrets she'd uncovered were just the beginning. The true test of her courage and integrity lay ahead, waiting to unfold in the days to come. Rachel's fingers trembled as she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. The diary lay open on her desk, its pages filled with damning information about Mayor Thompson's family. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Hello?" The mayor's gruff voice answered after 3 rings. "Mayor Thompson? This is Rachel Winters. I need to speak with you about something important." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Rachel? Edna's granddaughter? What's this about?" Rachel swallowed hard. "It's complicated. Could we meet in person? Privately?" Another pause, longer this time. "All right, come by my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. We'll talk then." The line went dead before Rachel could respond. She set her phone down, her mind racing. Was she really going to confront the most powerful man in Millbrook with decades-old secrets? The next morning, Rachel found herself standing outside the imposing town hall, the diary tucked safely in her bag. She smoothed down her blouse, took a deep breath, and walked inside. Mayor Thompson's office was a study in dark wood and leather, exuding an air of authority. The man himself sat behind a massive desk, his silver hair neatly combed, his suit impeccable. "Miss Winters," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit. Now, what's this all about?" Rachel perched on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mayor Thompson, I found something while cleaning out my grandmother's attic, something that concerns your family." The mayor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? And what might that be?" With shaking hands, Rachel pulled out the diary and placed it on the desk. "It's my grandmother's diary. She wrote about things that happened in Millbrook, things involving your father." Mayor Thompson's face remained impassive, but Rachel noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "That was a long time ago, Miss Winters. Ancient history, really. But sir, the things she wrote about, the land deals, the missing funds from the town treasury, these aren't just rumors. She has dates, amounts, names." The mayor leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin. "And what do you intend to do with this information, Miss Winters?" Rachel hesitated. What did she intend to do? She was a journalist, sworn to uncover the truth. But this could destroy lives, shatter reputations. I don't know," she admitted. "That's why I came to you first. I thought you deserved to know." Mayor Thompson stood up slowly, walking to the window. He gazed out at the town square, his back to Rachel. "You know, Miss Winters, Millbrook has a long and complicated history. Things weren't always as straightforward as they are now." He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. "What would you say if I told you that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good?" Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you saying that what your father did was justified?" The mayor sighed heavily. "I'm saying that the past is the past. Dragging up old scandals won't do anyone any good. It would only hurt innocent people, people who had nothing to do with what happened back then." Rachel's mind was spinning. She thought of the other names in the diary, the Petersons, the Garcias, the Stewarts, all prominent families in Millbrook, all implicated in one way or another. But don't people have a right to know the truth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mayor Thompson's eyes hardened. "And what about your family, Miss Winters? Have you read what your grandmother wrote about your grandfather?" Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't gotten that far in the diary yet. What do you mean?" The mayor picked up the diary, flipping through its pages with a familiarity that surprised Rachel. "Oh yes, Edna was quite thorough in her observations. Your grandfather played his part in all of this too. Are you prepared for what that might mean for your family's legacy?" Rachel sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. Her grandfather? The kind, gentle man she remembered from her childhood? What could he possibly have done? Mayor Thompson closed the diary and held it out to her. "Take some time to think about what you want to do, Miss Winters. But remember, once this box is opened, there's no closing it again. And the fallout, well, it might be more than you're prepared to handle. As Rachel left the town hall, the diary clutched tightly to her chest. She felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The town she thought she knew so well suddenly seemed alien and threatening. She walked to her car in a daze, her mind churning with questions. What was she going to do now? Could she really risk destroying so many lives, including her own family's, for the sake of decades-old secrets? As she drove home, Rachel realized that her journey into the past had only just begun, and the path ahead was far more treacherous than she could have ever imagined. Rachel sat at her kitchen table, the diary open before her, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of her laptop screen. She'd been up all night, cross-referencing names and dates, piecing together the intricate web of secrets that her grandmother had meticulously documented. The more she read, the more her stomach churned. The Petersons' real estate empire, built on fraudulent land deals. The Garcias' construction company, cutting corners and bribing inspectors. And the Stewarts, using their influence in the local bank to launder money for who knows what. But it was the entry about her own grandfather that made her pause, her finger hovering over the trackpad. Did she really want to know? Could she handle the truth about her own family? A sharp knock at the door startled her out of her reverie. Rachel glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Who could it be at this hour? She opened the door to find Lily standing there, concern etched on her face. Rachel, are you okay? You weren't answering your phone, and after you left dinner so abruptly the other night, I got worried. Rachel blinked, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Lily, Come in. There's something I need to show you. As Lily settled onto the couch, Rachel retrieved the diary. She took a deep breath and began to explain everything. Finding the diary, her meeting with Mayor Thompson, the web of corruption that seemed to entangle every prominent family in Millbrook. Lily's eyes widened as Rachel spoke. Rachel, this is huge. What are you going to do? Rachel sank into the armchair across from her friend. I don't know, Lily. Part of me feels like I have a responsibility to expose all of this. But another part is afraid of the consequences, Lily finished for her. She leaned forward, her voice low. Rachel, you need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, there are a lot of powerful people who won't want this information getting out. As if on cue, Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Oakwood Park, 1 p.m. Come alone. A friend. Rachel showed the message to Lily, who shook her head vehemently. No way, this is way too dangerous. You can't go alone. But Rachel could feel the pull of her journalistic instincts. What if this is someone who can help? Someone who knows more about what's in the diary? After much debate, they agreed on a compromise. Rachel would go to the meeting, but Lily would be nearby, ready to call for help if needed. As Rachel approached the designated meeting spot in Oakwood Park, her heart raced. The old gazebo stood empty, its white paint peeling in the afternoon sun. Miss Winters, a voice called from behind her. Rachel spun around to see an elderly man emerge from behind a large oak tree. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Who are you? Rachel asked, her hand tightening on her bag where the diary was hidden. The man smiled sadly. Someone who's been carrying secrets for far too long. I worked for your grandfather, back in the day. I know what's in that diary of your grandmother's. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. You knew my grandfather? And you know about the diary? The old man nodded. Your grandmother wasn't the only one who kept records. Some of us, we couldn't stand by and do nothing. But we were afraid of what would happen if we spoke up. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. Everything I know, everything I've gathered over the years, it's all here. Names, dates, bank records, enough to corroborate what's in that diary and then some. Rachel stared at the small device, her mind reeling. Why are you giving this to me? The old man's eyes misted over. Because it's time, Miss Winters. Time for the truth to come out. and because I think you're brave enough to do what needs to be done." As Rachel took the USB drive, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This was no longer just about her grandmother's diary. This was about decades of secrets, lies, and corruption that had shaped her town. "What about my grandfather?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did he do?" The old man's expression softened. "Your grandfather. He made mistakes, like many of us did. But in the end, he tried to make things right. That diary? He knew about it. He wanted your grandmother to keep writing, to keep a record. He hoped that someday, someone would be brave enough to use it to uncover the truth." As Rachel walked back to where Lily was waiting, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She had come seeking answers, but now she found herself with even more questions, and a decision to make, one that could change everything. The sun was setting over Millbrook as Rachel and Lily drove home, casting long shadows across the familiar streets. But to Rachel, nothing looked the same anymore. Behind every manicured lawn and friendly smile, she now saw the potential for long-buried secrets. She clutched the USB drive in her hand, feeling its weight, not just physically, but the weight of the truth it contained. The choice before her was clear, but the path forward was anything but. Rachel sat at her desk, the soft glow of her computer screen illuminating her determined face. The USB drive lay next to her keyboard, a silent testament to the weight of her decision. She had spent the last few days poring over its contents, cross-referencing the information with her grandmother's diary. The picture that emerged was both clearer and more complex than she had initially imagined. Corruption ran deep in Millbrook, intertwining families and businesses in a web of deceit that spanned decades. But there were also instances of people trying to make amends, to right wrongs in small ways. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she contemplated her next move. The journalist in her urged her to write, to expose everything. But the granddaughter, the member of this community, hesitated. A knock on her apartment door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Lily, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this," Lily said, handing her a cup. "How's it going?" Rachel sighed, leading her friend to the living room. "It's overwhelming. There's so much here, Lily. I don't even know where to start." Lily took a sip of her coffee, her brow furrowed in concern. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" "I think so," Rachel said slowly. "I can't just sit on this information, but I can't just dump it all out there either. These are people's lives we're talking about." She walked to her desk, picking up a notepad filled with scribbled names and connections. "I'm going to write a series of articles. Start with the historical context, the economic pressures of the time, then gradually introduce the key players, the decisions they made, the consequences." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds reasonable. But Rachel, are you prepared for the backlash? This could change everything in Millbrook." Rachel's face set in determination. "I have to do this, Lily. For my grandmother, for my grandfather, for the truth." Over the next few days, Rachel threw herself into her work. She crafted her first article carefully, painting a picture of Millbrook in the 1960s, a town on the brink of change, facing economic pressures and the lure of easy money. As she was putting the finishing touches on the piece, her phone rang. It was her editor, Jack. "Rachel, I just got a call from Mayor Thompson. He says you've been making some pretty serious allegations. Want to tell me what's going on?" Rachel's heart raced. She hadn't told anyone at the paper about her investigation yet. "Jack, I'm working on a big story, a series actually, about the history of Millbrook. There are some things that have been hidden for a long time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Rachel, you know I trust your instincts, but this sounds big. Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure, Jack. I have evidence. Lots of it. This is the story of a lifetime." Another pause. "Okay, bring what you have to my office tomorrow morning. We'll go through it together." The next day, Rachel walked into the Millbrook Gazette offices, her bag heavy with the diary, printouts, and her laptop. As she approached Jack's office, she could see Mayor Thompson through the glass walls, engaged in what looked like a heated discussion with her editor. Rachel's steps faltered. Was she too late? Had the mayor somehow gotten wind of her plans? Just then, Jack looked up and saw her. He said something to the mayor and stood up, walking to his office door. "Ah, Rachel, good timing. The mayor here was just expressing some concerns about your recent activities. Why don't you join us?" Rachel swallowed hard and entered the office. Mayor Thompson's face was a mask of calm, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "I thought we had an understanding about the sensitive nature of the information you stumbled upon." Rachel straightened her spine, meeting his gaze. "With all due respect, Mayor Thompson, I'm a journalist. My job is to uncover the truth, not bury it." Jack looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Okay, I think it's time someone filled me in on what's going on here." For the next hour, Rachel laid out everything she had discovered: the diary, the USB drive, the web of corruption and cover-ups that had shaped Millbrook for decades. As she spoke, she could see the color draining from the mayor's face. When she finished, the office was silent. Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Mayor Thompson sat very still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Finally, Jack spoke. "Rachel, this is explosive stuff. Are you absolutely certain about your sources? About the veracity of this information?" Rachel nodded firmly. "I've triple-checked everything, Jack. It's real. All of it." The mayor cleared his throat. "Mr. Edwards, surely you can see the damage this could do to our town, to innocent people who had nothing to do with events that happened decades ago." Jack looked at the mayor, then back at Rachel. She could see him weighing the implications, the potential fallout. In that moment, Rachel knew that whatever Jack decided, there was no going back. The truth was out there now, and one way or another, Millbrook would never be the same. The tension in Jack's office was palpable as Rachel, Mayor Thompson, and Jack himself sat in silence. The weight of Rachel's revelations hung heavy in the air, each person grappling with the implications of what had been unveiled. Jack was the first to break the silence. "Mayor Thompson, I understand your concerns, but if what Rachel has uncovered is true, we have a responsibility to our readers, to the people of Millbrook." The mayor's face tightened. "You're talking about destroying lives, reputations that have been built over generations. Is that really what you want for this town?" Rachel leaned forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's not about what we want, Mayor. It's about the truth. The people of Millbrook deserve to know." Jack nodded slowly, his decision visibly forming. "We'll run the series, Rachel, but..." He held up a hand as Mayor Thompson began to protest. "We'll do it responsibly. We'll give those implicated a chance to respond, to tell their side of the story." The mayor stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're making a grave mistake. Both of you." He turned to Rachel, his eyes cold. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences, Miss Winters." As the door closed behind the mayor, Rachel let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Jack gave her a wry smile. "Well, I think it's safe to say you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest." Over the next few days, Rachel worked tirelessly, refining her articles and gathering additional corroborating evidence. The first piece in the series was set to run on Sunday, and the entire town was buzzing with speculation about what the Millbrook Gazette's explosive exposé might reveal. On Saturday evening, as Rachel was making final edits to her article, her phone rang. It was Lily. "Rachel, you need to come to the Rusty Nail right now." Lily's voice was urgent. "Everyone's here and they're talking about you, about the article." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, everyone?" "I mean everyone, the Petersons, the Garcias, the Stewarts, even old Mr. Johnson who used to work for your grandfather. They're all here and they're not happy." Rachel's mind raced. How had word gotten out so quickly? "Lily, I don't think..." "Rachel, please, you need to face this head on. Come and talk to them. After a moment's hesitation, Rachel agreed. As she drove to the rusty nail, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. She had known there would be backlash, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon, or so forcefully. The parking lot was full when she arrived. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door to the restaurant. The usual weekend chatter died down as she entered, all eyes turning to her. Lily rushed over, her face pale. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would be like this." Before Rachel could respond, Mr. Peterson, the town's biggest real estate developer, stood up. "Well, if it isn't our own little Woodward and Bernstein, come to see the fruits of your labor?" Rachel straightened her shoulders, facing the crowd. "I'm just trying to uncover the truth, Mr. Peterson. Isn't that what we all want?" Mrs. Garcia scoffed. "The truth? You're dredging up ancient history, things that happened before most of us were even born. But they still affect us today," Rachel countered. "The decisions made back then shaped our town, our lives." Old Mr. Johnson, his face lined with age and worry, spoke up. "She's right, you know. We've been living with these secrets for too long." The room erupted into argument, accusations flying back and forth. Rachel stood in the middle of it all, trying to make her voice heard above the din. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the noise. Everyone turned to see Jack standing in the doorway. "All right, that's enough," he said, his voice commanding attention. "This isn't how we do things in Millbrook. We don't shout each other down. We don't intimidate." He walked over to Rachel, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow, the first article in Rachel's series will run. It's factual, it's fair, and it gives everyone mentioned a chance to respond. I suggest you all go home, read it, and then we can have a civilized discussion about what it means for our town." As the crowd began to disperse, muttering and shooting glances at Rachel, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was only the beginning. Jack turned to her, his expression serious. "You okay, kid?" Rachel nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks, Jack." He squeezed her shoulder. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." As Rachel left the rusty nail, she could feel the weight of the town's eyes on her. She had known exposing the truth wouldn't be easy, but standing there, in the midst of the anger and fear she'd unleashed, she realized just how difficult the road ahead would be. But as she drove home, her resolve strengthened. The truth needed to come out, no matter the cost. Millbrook would never be the same, but maybe, just maybe, it could become something better. The morning sun crept through Rachel's curtains, rousing her from a fitful sleep. She reached for her phone, her heart racing as she saw the flood of notifications. The first article in her series had gone live at midnight, and it seemed all of Millbrook was talking about it. With trembling fingers, she opened the Millbrook Gazette's website. There it was, splashed across the homepage. Millbrook's hidden history, the foundations of a town built on secrets. Rachel had focused the first article on the economic pressures of the 1960s and how they led to some of the town's prominent families making questionable decisions. She had been careful not to name names yet, instead painting a picture of a town at a crossroads. As she scrolled through the comments, she saw a mix of reactions. Some praised the article for its thorough research and balanced approach. Others accused her of stirring up trouble and tarnishing the town's reputation. A text from Lily popped up. "You okay? Want me to come over?" Rachel typed back a quick reply. "I'm fine. Going to head to the office soon. Talk later?" She got dressed quickly, opting for a simple blouse and slacks. As she left her apartment, she could feel the weight of eyes on her. Her normally friendly neighbors averted their gazes or whispered behind their hands. The walk to the Millbrook Gazette office felt longer than usual. As she passed by the local diner, she overheard snippets of conversation. "Did you read that article? I can't believe. Wonder who she's going to name next." Just trying to make a name for herself, Rachel quickened her pace, her cheeks burning. She had known there would be fallout, but experiencing it firsthand was different. As she entered the office, a hush fell over the newsroom. Her colleagues looked at her with a mix of awe and apprehension. Jack emerged from his office, beckoning her over. "Quite a stir you've caused, Rachel," he said, closing the door behind them. "The phone's been ringing off the hook all morning." Rachel swallowed hard. "Good calls or bad?" Jack shrugged. "Both. Mayor Thompson called, of course. He's demanding a retraction. The Historical Society, on the other hand, wants to know if you'd be willing to do an interview about your research." Rachel nodded, trying to process the information. "What do you think, Jack? Did I do the right thing?" Her editor leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "Journalism isn't about doing what's easy, Rachel. It's about doing what's right. You've opened Pandora's box, no doubt about it. But sometimes that's necessary." Just then there was a knock at the door. Jack's secretary poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but Rachel, you have a visitor. Says it's urgent." Rachel followed the secretary out to the lobby, where she found Mr. Johnson, the elderly man who had worked for her grandfather. His face was etched with worry. "Miss Winters," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk. Not here. Can you meet me at the park in an hour?" Rachel hesitated, remembering Lily's warnings about meeting sources alone. But something in Mr. Johnson's eyes made her nod. "Okay, I'll be there." An hour later, Rachel found herself sitting on a park bench beside Mr. Johnson. The old man's hands shook slightly as he pulled out a weathered envelope. "Your article this morning, it was good. Fair. But there's more to the story," he said, handing her the envelope. "Your grandfather, he wasn't just a bystander in all this. He tried to stop it." Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she opened the envelope. Inside were letters, dated from the late 1960s, detailing her grandfather's attempts to expose the corruption in Millbrook. "He was gathering evidence, building a case," Mr. Johnson explained. "But before he could go public, there was an accident. The official report said it was a car crash, but..." Rachel's mind reeled. "Are you saying my grandfather was murdered?" Mr. Johnson shook his head. "I don't know for sure. But after the accident, all his evidence disappeared. Your grandmother's diary and my records are all that's left." As Rachel read through the letters, she felt a mix of pride and sorrow. Her grandfather had been a hero, trying to do the right thing in a town mired in corruption. "Why are you showing me this now?" she asked. Mr. Johnson's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Because history is repeating itself, Miss Winters. The same forces that silenced your grandfather are still at work in Millbrook, and I'm afraid they might come for you next." Rachel clutched the letters to her chest, her mind racing. The story she had uncovered was bigger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. But now, with her grandfather's legacy in her hands, she knew she couldn't back down. As she left the park, Rachel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The truth needed to come out, not just for Millbrook's future, but for her grandfather's memory. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Rachel sat at her desk, surrounded by a sea of documents. Her grandfather's letters lay spread out before her, their yellowed pages a stark contrast to the crisp printouts of her research. The second article in her series was due tomorrow, and she knew it would be the most explosive yet. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "How's it going? Need any help?" Rachel smiled, grateful for her friend's unwavering support. She typed back, "Thanks, but I've got to do this part alone. Talk soon." As she turned back to her work, a knock on her apartment door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. To her surprise, she saw Mrs. Garcia, the matriarch of one of Millbrook's oldest families. Rachel opened the door, her guard up. "Mrs. Garcia, what can I do for you?" The older woman's usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed. "May I come in, Rachel? I need to talk to you." Hesitantly, Rachel stepped aside, allowing Mrs. Garcia to enter. They sat in the living room, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, Mrs. Garcia spoke. Your article, it's brought up a lot of old memories, things we've tried to forget. Rachel leaned forward, her journalist instincts kicking in. What kind of things, Mrs. Garcia? The older woman's hands twisted in her lap. My husband, he wasn't always the man you knew. Back then he was young, ambitious. When the opportunity came to make some easy money, he took it. We all did. As Mrs. Garcia began to talk, Rachel listened intently, taking mental notes. The story that unfolded was one of young families struggling to make ends meet, of temptations and compromises, of a town slowly losing its moral compass. We didn't think anyone would get hurt, Mrs. Garcia said, her voice barely above a whisper. But then, people started asking questions. Your grandfather, he was one of them. Rachel's heart raced. Did you know about what happened to him? Mrs. Garcia shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Not at the time. We heard rumors, but we were too afraid to look too closely. It was easier to believe the official story. As the confession poured out, Rachel felt a mix of emotions: anger at the cover-up, sympathy for the impossible choices these families had faced, and a renewed determination to uncover the full truth. When Mrs. Garcia finished, she looked at Rachel with pleading eyes. What are you going to do now? Rachel took a deep breath. I'm going to tell the truth, Mrs. Garcia. All of it, but I promise to be fair. Your story, what you've told me today, it's important. It shows the human side of what happened. Mrs. Garcia nodded slowly. I understand, and thank you for listening, for not judging. After Mrs. Garcia left, Rachel threw herself back into her work with renewed vigor. She rewrote parts of her article, weaving in the personal stories and motivations behind the town's dark secrets. As the night wore on, Rachel's phone rang. It was Jack. Rachel, we've got a problem. Her editor's voice was tense. Someone broke into the office tonight. They were after your files. Rachel's blood ran cold. Was anything taken? No, our security system scared them off. But Rachel, this is serious. Whoever is behind this, they're getting desperate. Rachel glanced at the stack of documents on her desk, at her grandfather's letters. I know, Jack, but we can't stop now. We're too close. There was a pause on the other end of the line. All right, but I want you to be careful. Maybe stay with a friend for a few days? After hanging up, Rachel called Lily, quickly explaining the situation. Within an hour, she was at Lily's apartment, her most important documents safely tucked away in her bag. As they sat on Lily's couch, mugs of tea in hand, Rachel felt the weight of the past few weeks settling on her shoulders. Am I doing the right thing, Lily? She asked, her voice small. What if this tears the town apart? Lily put an arm around her friend. The truth was always there, Rachel. You're just bringing it to light. Whatever happens next, Millbrook will be better for it in the long run. Rachel nodded, drawing strength from her friend's words. She thought of her grandfather, of Mrs. Garcia, of all the people whose lives had been shaped by these long-buried secrets. As she drifted off to sleep on Lily's couch, Rachel made a silent promise. She would see this through, no matter what. For her grandfather, for the truth, and for the future of Millbrook. The next morning would bring new challenges, new revelations. But for now, in the quiet of the night, Rachel found a moment of peace, secure in the knowledge that she was on the right path. The Millbrook Gazette's office was abuzz with activity as Rachel walked in, her latest article clutched tightly in her hand. Eyes followed her as she made her way to Jack's office, a mix of admiration and apprehension in her colleagues' gazes. Jack looked up as she entered, his face etched with concern. Rachel, are you sure about this? This article, it names names. It's going to change everything. Rachel nodded, her resolve firm. I'm sure, Jack. We've triple-checked every fact, given everyone mentioned a chance to respond. It's time for the truth to come out. With a heavy sigh, Jack took the article. All right, we'll run it in tomorrow's edition. But Rachel, I want you to take some time off after this. Lay low for a while. As Rachel left the office, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the old mill, 3 p.m. Come alone. A friend. Her heart raced as she read the message. The old mill was on the outskirts of town, abandoned for years. It was exactly the kind of place she'd been warned to avoid. And yet, after a moment's hesitation, she texted Lily, meeting a source at the old mill. If you don't hear from me by 4, call Jack. At 3 p.m. sharp, Rachel pulled up to the dilapidated mill. The rusty gates creaked as she pushed them open, her footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. Hello, she called out, her voice wavering slightly. Over here, Miss Winters. Rachel turned to see Mayor Thompson step out from behind a crumbling wall. Her breath caught in her throat. Mayor? What are you doing here? The mayor's face was a mask of weariness. I think it's time we had an honest conversation, don't you? For the next hour, Mayor Thompson laid bare the intricate web of lies and half-truths that had governed Millbrook for decades. He spoke of the pressure to maintain the town's image, of the difficult choices made in the name of progress. Your grandfather, he said, his voice heavy with regret, he was a good man, too good for the likes of us. When he started asking questions, well, some people got scared. Rachel's hands clenched into fists. Did you have something to do with his accident? The mayor shook his head vehemently. No, God, no, but I didn't do anything to stop it either. That's a guilt I've carried for years. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the abandoned mill, Rachel felt a shift in the air. The truth was finally coming to light, but at what cost? What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mayor Thompson sighed deeply. That's up to you, Miss Winters. Your article, it's going to change everything. Some people will never forgive you for it. Others will hail you as a hero. But the Millbrook we knew, it's gone either way. As Rachel drove back into town, her mind whirled with everything she'd learned. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than ever. She arrived at the Gazette's office just as the first copies of the next day's paper were rolling off the press. Jack handed her a copy, his face solemn. It's done, he said simply. Rachel stared at the front page, her article splashed across it in bold print. The secrets she'd uncovered, the truths she'd fought so hard to bring to light, were now there for all to see. As she left the office, she could feel the town holding its collective breath. Tomorrow, everything would change. Reputations would be shattered, long-held beliefs challenged, the very fabric of Millbrook's society torn apart and rewoven. Rachel drove to the town's edge, parking at a lookout point that offered a view of Millbrook spread out below. The lights of the town twinkled in the gathering dusk, peaceful and unaware of the storm about to break. Her phone buzzed incessantly, calls from unknown numbers, texts from friends and strangers alike. But Rachel ignored them all, her eyes fixed on the town she'd grown up in, the town she'd just turned upside down. As night fell, Rachel sat there, watching and waiting. Tomorrow would bring chaos, anger, perhaps even danger, but it would also bring truth, and with it, the possibility of real change. In that moment, looking down at Millbrook, Rachel felt a complex mix of emotions: fear, pride, uncertainty, and hope. Whatever came next, she knew she had done the right thing. The truth was out there now, and Millbrook would never be the same. As she finally turned her car around and headed home, Rachel whispered a quiet promise to herself, to her grandfather, and to the town she loved. We'll get through this. Somehow, we'll make it right. The dawn of a new era for Millbrook was about to break, and Rachel Winters had lit the spark that would change everything. The morning after Rachel's explosive article hit the stands, Millbrook awoke to a town forever changed. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the rustle of newspapers and the low murmur of hushed conversations behind closed doors. Rachel sat at her kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee and staring at her silent phone. She had turned off all notifications the night before, unable to bear the constant barrage of messages. Now in the cold light of day, she steeled herself and turned her phone back on. The screen lit up with a flood of notifications, missed calls, text messages, emails. Some were from friends offering support, others from strangers hurling accusations. But one message caught her eye, a voicemail from Jack. "Rachel, we need to talk. Come to the office as soon as you can. It's important." With a heavy sigh, Rachel got dressed and headed out. As she walked through town, she could feel the weight of stares following her. Some people quickly averted their gaze, while others nodded in silent acknowledgement. At the Millbrook Gazette office, she found Jack pacing nervously. "Rachel, thank God you're here. We've got a situation." He led her to the conference room, where several members of the town council were waiting, along with Mrs. Garcia and Mr. Peterson. "What's going on?" Rachel asked, her heart racing. Mrs. Garcia stepped forward, her face a mix of emotions. "Rachel, what you've done, it's shaken this town to its core, but it's also given us a chance to make things right." Mr. Peterson nodded solemnly. "We've been up all night talking about the past, about the future, and we've come to a decision." For the next hour, Rachel listened as the town leaders laid out their plan. They wanted to come clean, to admit to their past mistakes and work towards making amends. They proposed setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to address the wrongs of the past and find a way forward. "We want you to be part of this, Rachel," Mrs. Garcia said. "Your grandfather started this journey. It's fitting that you should help see it through." Rachel felt overwhelmed. This was more than she had ever expected. I don't know what to say. This is a lot to take in." Jack put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide right now. But Rachel, this could be a chance to heal the town, to bring people together instead of tearing them apart." As the meeting wrapped up, Rachel found herself walking through the town square. The normally bustling area was subdued, with small groups of people huddled in conversation. She overheard snippets as she passed. "Can you believe it? All these years. What do we do now? Maybe it's time for a change." Rachel's steps led her to the old town hall, where a crowd had gathered. To her surprise, she saw Mayor Thompson standing on the steps, addressing the people. "And so, my friends, I stand before you today to announce my resignation," the mayor was saying, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's time for new leadership, for a fresh start. Millbrook deserves better than the shadows of the past." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rachel felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see Lily. "Can you believe all this?" Lily whispered. "It's like the whole town has turned upside down overnight." Rachel nodded, still processing everything. "I never imagined it would come to this. I just wanted the truth to come out." As they stood there, watching the mayor's speech, Rachel felt a strange mix of emotions: pride in what she had accomplished, fear of what might come next, and a glimmer of hope for Millbrook's future. The day wore on, and Rachel found herself back at home, sitting on her porch as the sun began to set. The town was quieter now, the initial shock giving way to reflection. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "You okay?" "Big day tomorrow, the first meeting of the Reconciliation Committee." Rachel took a deep breath, looking out over the town she had known all her life. It was the same Millbrook, and yet everything had changed. The secrets were out, the lies exposed. Now came the hard part: rebuilding, healing, moving forward. As she watched the last rays of sunlight paint the sky, Rachel made her decision. She would be part of this new chapter in Millbrook's history. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. She texted back to Jack, "I'm in. Let's do this." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and perhaps a new beginning for Millbrook. And Rachel Winters, the girl who found a diary in the attic, would be right there in the middle of it all, helping to write the next chapter of her town's story. 1 year had passed since Rachel's revelations shook Millbrook to its core. The town square bustled with activity as people gathered for the unveiling of a new memorial. Rachel stood near the podium, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Mayor Linda Chen, elected in the wake of the previous administration's resignation, stepped up to the microphone. "Today, we honor those who had the courage to seek the truth and those who had the strength to face it," she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. Rachel's eyes swept over the familiar faces. Mrs. Garcia sat in the front row, her head held high despite the challenges of the past year. Mr. Peterson stood at the back, a small smile on his face as he nodded to Rachel. Even Jack was there, notepad in hand, ready to document this historic moment for the Millbrook Gazette. As the mayor continued her speech, Rachel reflected on the tumultuous journey that had led to this day. The Truth and Reconciliation Committee had been grueling work, filled with painful confessions and difficult conversations. But slowly, steadily, the town had begun to heal. The new memorial was unveiled, a simple stone obelisk with an engraving that read, "In memory of those who sought truth and justice. May their courage inspire generations to come." At the base, a smaller plaque bore the name of Rachel's grandfather, recognizing his early efforts to expose the town's secrets. After the ceremony, Rachel found herself approached by countless townspeople. Some offered thanks, others apologies, and a few even shared news stories that had come to light during the reconciliation process. Lily appeared at her side, squeezing her hand. "You did it, Rach. You changed everything." Rachel smiled but shook her head. "We all did it. The whole town came together when it mattered most." As the crowd began to disperse, Rachel made her way to the old attic room where it had all begun. The space was different now, cleaned up and converted into a small museum dedicated to Millbrook's history, both the good and the bad. Her grandmother's diary sat in a glass case, open to the first page. Beside it lay copies of Rachel's articles and transcripts from the reconciliation meetings. It was all there, the full story of Millbrook, no longer hidden in the shadows. Rachel ran her fingers lightly over the glass, remembering the weight of the diary in her hands that first day. She had been searching for a story then, never imagining how it would change her life and the entire town. "Quite a legacy you've created," a voice said behind her. Rachel turned to see old Mr. Johnson leaning on his cane. "It's everyone's legacy now," Rachel replied. "The good and the bad. It's all part of who we are." Mr. Johnson nodded sagely. "Your grandfather would be proud. As am I." As they left the museum together, Rachel paused at the doorway, taking one last look at the diary that had started it all. The secrets it held no longer had power over Millbrook. Instead, they had become a catalyst for change, for growth, for a new beginning. Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook, casting a warm glow over the town. Rachel breathed in deeply, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The town wasn't perfect, there was still work to be done, wounds still healing, but it was honest now, facing its past and looking toward the future with clear eyes. As she walked home through the familiar streets, Rachel knew that while the story of the diary had come to an end, Millbrook's story, and her own, was far from over. And whatever chapters lay ahead, they would face them together, with truth and courage lighting the way. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Now, how about another one? To watch another nice story, just click on the video appearing on your screen.